When the truth is found, you'll be light. You know the joy within you dies. Don't you want somebody to love?
Hello and welcome to the first anniversary edition of Drive-In Double Feature. I'm Ryan.
I'm Nathan.
And this is the podcast where we talk about 2 movies a week every Tuesday and Thursday. But before we get into any of that other stuff, we have a Patreon over at patreon.com/drive-in-double-feature-podcast. Just some fun conversations, maybe a couple of games, a guest or two every now and then. Who knows? Just a couple of fun times between us that we like to give something extra to you patrons out there that we appreciate so much. If you don't, though, it does not affect any regular content. But if you'd like to support us, head on over there. But today, on our very first anniversary edition, we're going to be doing 1981's American Pop, directed by Ralph Bakshi, that we're doing again. But before we get into that, though, Nathan, it's been a year. Can you believe it?
I can't believe it. A year went by way too fast. But it also feels like a long time ago. I don't know. If you look back at those first episodes, like Police Story or something, I'm like, oh wow, we talked about that forever ago. And then, but also it went by so fast. I don't get it. It's like a mix of the two for me.
I know. I feel the same way because I wonder, I'm like, it's only been a year, but it feels like we've been doing this podcast for a long time. And I guess that just goes to show how much fun we have doing it because it never feels like a job or anything like that. Like I said, we've been doing this for a year now, and I have just as much fun, if not more fun, than I did from the very first episode.
Oh, yeah. I seriously look forward to these episodes every week. It's just so much fun to sit here and talk about some cool movies. And I found some new favorites, some new least favorites too. You know, it's a fun mix.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, we've talked about it. I mean, we don't have like a super wide like super wide audience, which is fine, because I mean, for me personally, I don't really feel like I get a lot of creative outlets where I can actually have like time to sit and watch movies I never would have, or actually get to express my opinions, because a lot of times, like it'd be like, you and I would talk or whatever, but it would only be like when we're like out hanging out or whatever, something like that. So it feels a lot more coherent when you're able to actually do something like that. And I actually get to do that fun research, because I would do that a lot of times on my own, like for movies, is I would go in and research as much as I could about a movie if I really enjoyed it a lot. So now it's like, oh, I can actually do that and I could tell somebody about it now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, totally agree. It's just nice to hang out, because I think we talked about this before we were even recording, when we would talk and be like, oh, we should do a podcast or something. No, it's just fun though. I don't know. It's being in the room with somebody that appreciates and enjoys movies just as much as you do, and just discussing them is, I don't know, it's just a wonderful feeling.
Because, a lot of times too, like when you try to engage with people that aren't in love with movies, it's like they're like, oh yeah, I like that movie, it was good, and I'm like, well, why was it good? Like, did you like, like
Yes,
and then they're just like, they're like, I don't know, it was good, or like somebody like name a favorite movie or whatever, and they struggle to think of like, I don't know, and that's why it's always so nice getting to actually talk to somebody that appreciates them as much as I do.
Yeah. Well, what I love about this is that we do get to discover movies together, and I guess today's movie was our first, I feel like, mutual discovery of like, oh wow, what a great movie.
Yeah. And if you didn't listen to the explanation I gave on the last episode, this is we kind of did like a practice run, whatever you want to call it, on the Media Boys podcast channel, where we talked about some movies, and we did our very first episode was talking about Ralph Bakshi's filmography, and definitely some hit or misses out there, but this one was definitely like the clear favorite out of all of them. And we both felt it was appropriate if we were going to redo an episode we were going to do like the one from the very first episode. So I'm actually really glad we got to come back and do this one.
Yeah, me too. Because I've been really wanting to rewatch this movie anyway, so this was a perfect excuse for that. But I guess just because that was so long ago on a different podcast, what
Yeah.
what draws you to Ralph Bakshi's work?
I at first it was just kind of like I was on some website or whatever, and they're like, oh, like the biggest WTF movies, or like controversial movies, or whatever you want to call it. And
Mhm.
on that list was the movie Fritz the Cat. And Fritz the Cat, if you're not aware, is like one of the very first like adult themed feature length cartoons.
Mhm.
And which lewd, crude, rude, whatever you want to describe it as, it's all those things. And it's definitely not a kid's movie, I'll say that. And
No.
I watched it, and at first I was kind of like, that was different. I'm not really sure if I liked it, but it's one of those movies where it just kind of sits in your brain, and you're like, like, let me just rewatch that. And then you rewatch it, and then it's like, each time I watch that one, it's like I appreciate it more and more each time. And that's kind of how I feel about a lot of this. I mean, a lot of his filmography, I'll just be blunt, is about 50% of it is good.
Yeah, no. I think I said this before, but like on the last show, but I still hold this, that Ralph Bakshi is like my favorite director that I don't particularly love a lot of his work. I think he's such an ambitious person with a lot of big ideas, and I love someone like him because he's such a huge force from the 70s that really tried to usher in mature animation more for adults, away from children. And I don't think a lot of his movies work. I think they're cool. I think a lot of them are cool, and there's definitely some really bad ones, but I just like him. I like what he stands for, what he tried to do, and I think I don't know. He's just a really interesting director. Probably one of my favorite animation directors for sure.
Yeah, and he was kind of like one of like he's been animating his whole life. He was on like a lot of like old cartoons, like ever since he was like 18. So from like the 50s onwards, he's been involved with cartoons.
Yeah.
And like Deputy Dog was like another one. Like he's worked on those type of things. And I think he had like a little bit of a stint where he's worked like, I think he worked for Hanna-Barbera for like a little bit. Yeah.
He did. Yeah. Well, I recently read a book on animation, and it had only a short section on him in it. But yeah, he took over for Hanna-Barbera for a little bit, and then that's kind of when he broke free from that and was like, you know what, I'm gonna try something a little different. But yeah, he's been working on cartoons forever. He still makes like shorts and stuff to this day.
Yeah, and he's definitely made some controversial. Very much a guy that he takes a lot of aspects from his life and makes it into like into a movie. And he did that with Fritz the Cat, Heavy Traffic, Coonskin, a lot of other ones. But probably, I guess his most famous one is he made the very first adaptation of Lord of the Rings.
Yes, yeah.
And that one is so different from all the other ones, not in terms of animation, but it's just like he got Lord of the Rings, and this was before Lord of the Rings was even like a thing, like, and now it's like pop culture, like iconic status. And back then it was just like, oh, this is just that book that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote. So
yeah, it was like, oh, just fantasy stuff that kids like, maybe not kids like, but it's just fantasy stuff. It's not on the same status. And I mean, that movie in itself captures Bakshi as well, where I think it's doing some cool, neat stuff, but I just don't think it all comes together well. But it's just an interesting movie because it's like rotoscoped and everything. It's neat.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up rotoscope, because that is pretty much how this movie was made. And if you're not familiar with what rotoscoping is, it's basically just taking real life movements. So like, say like you filmed like somebody doing an action or whatever, and then somebody just paints over it. And so the motions looks a lot more human like, but it's like a human. It's one of the very ways you could do an animated movie where like actual humans act out the roles.
Yeah, yeah, and you kind of get the lip movements right and down everything because it's all painted over, and it has a really interesting look to it. A look that I've always liked. I don't know, rotoscoping just looks interesting because I know a lot of people will say like, oh, what's the point of rotoscoping if you're just copying? But it does have a distinct style. It doesn't look entirely lifelike. It does look like a cartoon character, but just maybe a little more fluid. I don't know. I think it gives it a flair.
I'm to me, it's like if it's when it's done well, it's I really appreciate it. But I definitely have seen some bad ones where I'm just like, yeah, it's not. I would have gone with a different animation. I wouldn't use it as an all like for everything, definitely. But this one, it works well because they use a lot of like real life concert footage. They use a lot of real life people, and this is Ralph Bakshi's probably most serious movie. And we, you and I kind of talked about it before, is that it's not one, like he's very hit or miss. And some of it is just like, some of his other movies are just so stupid and so crude in my opinions that I'm like, did not like at all. Like some of the other ones he even made after this one, like Fire and Ice, is probably one of the most boring things I sat through.
Terrible.
And, but it's the reason why I say that is because directors kind of look for their legacy, and this one for me is like, this is a movie you can hang your hat on and be like, yeah, this is something he should be lauded for.
Yeah, I think this movie is a hidden masterpiece, and I think it was definitely like solidified for me when I watched this again. There was something about it where it all came together. We said this before, but I'll say it again. This movie, it's so good. It's so big. It's got a big idea. It's an epic. It would be like a 3-hour epic otherwise in live action, but and I'm not saying that as a negative because I think animation is perfect for this story as well, and we'll kind of get into that, but this movie's huge. It's huge in scope, and I actually think it works with it very well. I hardly have any issues with this movie.
I know, and I mean, this is another instance where I was like, I could see this movie being an hour longer, or like us getting to spend a little more time, spending a little more time with some of these other characters. Because, I mean, the main plot point is that it starts as like a young boy, as a Russian immigrant, Jewish boy, and he comes to America with his mother and 4 generations of his family. So he kind of starts that generation coming over from America, and it's just showing all that. And each family member is kind of getting to that point of stardom, but there's usually some type of like tragic circumstance or something that prevents them from getting to that superstardom.
It's kind of like trying to live the American dream of, taking your skills, being rich and famous, but it never quite worked out for anybody in this family. It was just a family that has dealt with a lot of hardship. And if this doesn't sound like a cartoon to you, I understand. Well, what I think what I really like about this compared to his other work, right? You talked about it being rude, crude, most of his other stuff. This is like what I think of mature animation would be, not like, oh, look, we can do something so gross and in your face. It's like we can tell just real life stories and give them to you. And it has to be done in cartoon. And I think it's done so well in cartoon because each generation, you don't have to hire somebody new. You don't have to hire somebody that may look completely different. They're able to make it so the family looks right, and we can go through almost 100 years in time just seamlessly.
Yeah, and the one thing that he does this in a lot of his movies, but and like stuff like this, it works really well where like they'll get real life footage like as a background sometimes, or they'll get like a photo and that'll be the background, or they'll just paint like this super detailed like painting like background, and they're just like, yeah, like that, it's the background, or they'll just get like something super abstract and like, yep, that's the background.
Yeah, this movie is really interesting. I think that's what's cool about it too. It uses a lot of mixed stuff. It doesn't have like one animation style. Like I know this is late in the movie, but I think about like it cuts from rotoscope characters to just like a still drawing of people like talking. And it has those pictures of real people throughout it, or sometimes there won't be a background. It'll just be a big black screen and you only see the characters in it. It's always doing something interesting. It never wants to be one thing. It always just likes to hop around and do something cool.
Yeah. And they explain, Ralph actually explained too in an interview that how much work like this goes into here. And
Mhm.
he was just showing like this, he had this huge stack of papers on the desk that's, probably like a foot tall. And he's like, that right there. He said, that's about 3 months worth of an animator doing hard work. And
Mhm.
that's probably going to only be about 10 seconds of the movie.
Absolutely insane the work that they put in. No wonder we moved to CG.
Yeah. I mean, I understand. I mean, it's not cost effective really to do an animated movie, but at the same time, it's almost becoming like a lost art form.
It is, yeah.
Which is sad because the times they have made 2D animations or like they've gone back and done it, I've always been like, oh wow, that worked out really well. And I'd like to see more of that, but it takes so long. I mean, and when you think about it, like they've changed it how they've done it now, but like even like The Simpsons or whatever, like it would take, I think they said from like concept to it being up, like airing on television, it could take up from like 9 months to a year. So
Yeah.
it could just for a 30-minute cartoon. So just think of it that way. Like if you're trying to reference something culturally relevant, by the time that it airs, it's already like old news.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine. That sounds like a tough job to deal with. I wonder how long this movie took to make. I never got to look into that.
They said 2.5 years is what he
2.5
said.
years. Wow, that is that's a labor of love to really focus that much time into a movie.
And it shows.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It does show. I mean, like I said, Ralph Bakshi, I mean, he takes a lot of his own personal experiences. He himself, he's a Jewish man, and the character is like a Jewish family. So it does have like a lot of some of the characters of him in there. And the thing, though, that's probably the biggest star of the whole movie, though, is, this is a musical, but it does have like the evolution of music starting from like the early 20th century up until the movie ends, which is about the 80s.
Yeah, and you get to see a lot of different kinds of music. If somebody now, it gets a little more recognizable as time gets further, but it's got really just like classic, like 1900 sounding music from the beginning, vaudeville stuff. And it's crazy. I really like the first story. So it's a movie pretty much made of 4 stories, I would say.
Yeah.
But the first one's really cool about the young boy who kind of gets brought up almost through the mafia and grows up around like a vaudeville setting. And he learns to sing through there, but he kind of loses that over time as he gets older. Kind of the very start of like, I could have had something, but it just left me kind of deal.
Yeah, that's kind of like it's setting the tone for that. And I think it works really well doing these kind of episodic type of parts to the movie, because that's how Ralph actually kind of operates a lot of times in his other movies, which we mentioned. It'll be like, oh, well, here's this scene that's kind of related to the plot, but not really. But this one, it's like 4 separate stories, like you said, and it's like each person has their own beginning and end to their story, which works really well for this type of atmosphere. I really do like the first part, though, like you said too, where his name is Zalmi, and it shows him like trying to become like a singer, then he has to become a comic, but then when that doesn't work out, then he goes full blown mafia guy, and that kind of leads into his wife getting murdered during like gangland
Yeah.
violence.
What a great moment. That scene, I don't know, there's something about it where she gets the package. It's like, oh, you bought me pretzels. And then
Yeah.
he just gets up like, no, put it away. And then it explodes. And then it transitions into his son being older, kind of doesn't talk or anything. It just, doesn't show the aftermath, but it kind of shows what happens just a lot later.
Yeah, and if anything, if any part in this movie needed to be longer, I actually think it's the second part of the movie.
I was going to say the exact same thing, actually.
Yeah, because it's his son named Benny,
Mhm.
and he actually has like immense talent when it comes to playing the piano, and he's kind of like at that point where he could be a star, but he's not necessarily pushing for it because his dad's like a big mafia guy, and he's like, I don't even want this, like, and he, in fact, he hates his dad being in the mafia so much that he actually enlists and goes into World War II.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting way to look at it, is kind of like squandered talent, because it seemed like he was an incredible piano player. And it's kind of like, I don't really want to use this talent. And then this part is, I think, just a little too short. I would have liked more development, because it would have made his death even sadder, because he does end up dying. And a great moment. This is a moment that I think about a lot, actually, outside of this movie.
It's such a great scene. It's just he's playing the piano, and a Nazi soldier just kind of sneaks up on him, and he could have easily killed him right there, but he lets him finish playing the piano, and he's just like, oh, danke, and then he just kills him right there, and it's a great moment. And there, it's probably like the scene I think about a lot. This one.
Yeah, and this part in particular, when he's at war, I just think is like, shows the power of, like, I guess, this team that worked on this, because the framing is really good. I like when people draw you see some animated movies where it's pretty, just like a landscape, you have your characters, but they almost use it like a camera, like everything is framed in broken windows or through broken buildings. It's not, it's not very plain, there's a lot to look at.
Oh yeah, and just like the sky that they used and like the foxholes that they have, just so detailed, and just the backgrounds, and it's like no wonder this movie took over 2 years to make.
Yeah. But after that, it's the third plot line that is I think the focal point of this movie. And I want to say that's probably because when we look at Bakshi's other movies, he really looks fondly on the 50s and 60s. And that's where he likes to go back to. So I think that's probably why this gets a lot of focus, but not saying that that's a bad thing. I think you get some great music here, and it's a great story too.
Oh yeah. I mean, you get Jefferson Airplane,
Mm-hmm.
Jimi Hendrix, a lot of really great 60s singers. And another reference, we referenced Jimi Hendrix in our zombie Pestilence 90.
Oh, that's right. I forgot the zombie of Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny.
So, I mean, this one, it's like it's Benny's son, Tony, and he's super angry guy all the time, and like he's like he's yelling at his family at all times. He's got a real bad temper, but he's probably like the least musically gifted out of everyone in his family, but he knows how to write a good song.
Yeah, that's his strength, is just writing, getting his emotions out, because I think that's what it is. He's just an angry guy. He's dealt with a lot, right? His dad died in war. He probably deals with like his grandpa, because there's a whole plot line where he starts talking. He's a part of the mafia, but he ends up talking in front of like ratting people out. So he has to deal with his grandpa being a rat, and like it definitely is a lot. And he ends up running away. And it's not even a lot about music at first. Well, that's now, because he sees the beat poetry. That's what he's mostly focused on, is people doing the poetry in front of everybody. But one of the lamest parts of this movie, and I think it's supposed to be lame because that's the whole joke, is him he goes to Kansas and he runs into the girl at the diner, and he's in the cornfield like, oh, this place is so corny.
Corny.
Yeah.
Yeah, Candace is corny. Yeah, candy corn. You got Cracker Jacks.
Can you eat it? Can you lay in it? I don't know. It was just an interesting choice, but it's a corny dialogue scene. I guess it makes sense.
It's it's a funny moment, and that's kind of what his deal is that he just, so another thing too Ralph Bakshi does in a lot of movies is he has like characters that are kind of speaking nonsense, but
Yeah.
that's kind of related to, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what this guy Tony does. Like he just kind of speaks in like these. I mean, he's not like incoherent, you know what he's saying, but it's just kind of like why would he say it like that? Like why would he
Yeah.
say that? Like, but it is related to the plot point, and like but it is. I think it's like that type of stuff is actually kind of endearing as a character, and like that's where like he meets like a waitress, and it's implied that they like have sex and everything.
Yeah.
So
I think it's what makes him a likable character, because otherwise he could be really unlikable. This character makes a lot of bad choices and stuff like that, and he's really angry, but it's those moments that you can kind of care a little more about the character.
yeah, and that's when it kind of delves into like that 60s mindset where people are just living real fast, like doing drugs and like just partying constantly. It's like he does have a love interest in here, named Frankie, and it's heavily implied that she's the lead singer of Jefferson Airplane or like a Janis Joplin type of singer.
That's what I got out of it. Yeah,
and I mean, it like all these famous Jefferson Airplane songs that are in here. It's implied that Tony wrote all these songs, like so that like those bands don't exist, but like all the songs in here exist in the movie, but it was done by like a completely different band or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And they actually kind of shoot their way up in stardom. But I guess he just doesn't handle it very well, and he gets really sucked into the drug culture. And I think this is probably like I think this moment's really painful. I hate seeing this, is whenever he gets the lead singer hooked on heroin, and it's like a whole drug binge, and they're happy together, but of course it's a horrible thing going on. It's hard to watch.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's but shot really well because it has like a lot of these psychedelic type of moments where it's like the shapes of their bodies are changing, or it's got these super multicolored backgrounds going on.
Yes, yeah. Or like a fisheye lens almost, where they're kind of coming at the camera. It's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tony, he kind of becomes like this tragic figure because he's the closest, but up until this point in the movie, he's like the closest member of his family to get to stardom because the band they shoot up like the Billboard charts, but he's so wrapped up in his own world and drugs, like he's he can't even like control himself.
Yeah, he's just so addicted, and this movie, or his plot line, doesn't have an happy ending. He never really gets out of that.
You don't even know what happens to him, really. I mean, he just. So the big plot point is like he, like a little boy, like starts following him around, and he's got the same blonde hair that the waitress was that he had sex with, and I think he kind of puts two and two together when he sees him, and it's not really told though, like how this boy like knows that he's his dad or anything. I'm guessing like his mom told him, or like he ran away from his mom maybe.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. It just kind of, he shows up and it's like you're supposed to make the connection that they're, that's his child. It doesn't really explain that. I don't think it really has to. It makes sense.
Yeah, but they kind of pal around for a while, and Tony just steals the kid's guitar, pawns it, and leaves this kid basically just to fend for himself, just like, see, I'm out of here. And
Yeah,
you never see him again.
yeah. He just like some guy comes back, gives him money, and is like, hey, he says bye, and then
Yeah.
that's it. you know. And I think that's where I love the ending of this movie. I know you love the ending of this movie because I think this is where this kid decides, like, after all these generations of, misuse of talent and everything going to squandering, I think this kid finally has decided, I'm going to change that. I'm actually do something. So it ends up being really good.
Yeah. So it's what I really like about this, because this is honestly like one of my favorite endings to a movie that I've seen. And what I really love about it is that you kind of get the sense. So like I said, he was abandoned by his father, like the only parental figure he has. He ends up staying in New York, and you don't see him, but like in one scene he's a kid, and the next scene he's a much older man.
Yeah.
So you already get the impression that he's been kind of having to fight for everything, and he's been like a fighter this whole time, and he's been fighting for whatever he wants. And he ends up, like it's implied, he had to become like a drug dealer and everything, but he still hasn't given up on the talent. And he's kind of inherited a lot of the talents like that his dad and then like previous generations had. Like he's a phenomenal singer. He can write his own songs. And he's got this great presence as well. So the final scene, which I will describe, is, him going to a recording studio. And I really like, I always recite these lines back, right? He's just like, pizza man, we deliver.
Yeah, I love the way
like,
he talks. He just he has like that super cool, like early, I don't know, it's like an 80s kind of macho deal going on.
He's like, and they're like, hey man, you got the Coke? He's like, what I look like, man? A soda fountain.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, no, there's good. And he calls it like candy and stuff.
I don't want to be no candy man no more.
Yeah.
I have been running and fighting for you turkeys for 3 years now. So, I mean, like when you listen to that dialogue though, it's like, he's saying like his whole like past, like he's been having to fight just for an opportunity just to even get heard. And he's been like basically being this like drug mule or whatever you want to call it, just to even get in the same room as these musicians that's going on right now.
That's so 80s because he refuses to give them cocaine and they're like, no, we'll give you whatever you want. Just please give us the drugs.
Oh yeah, they are like, please give us the drugs.
Yeah, we'll do anything. But that's the whole deal is it's like, I either give you the drugs and you let me play a song or I walk out. And they let him play his song.
Well, what I really like about that part though is, like I said, he's been fighting for the same time, but you kind of realize too that he's also really desperate at this point because he's been wanting just one opportunity. And at first he's like, I want you guys to play my song. And they're like, no way. And he's like, oh, well then I want you to record it. Like, no. And he's like, and they're like, okay. We'll listen to you play one song. So they're only giving this guy like one shot to just play this song. Like, and he's just like, all right, one, I'll do it. Like, he's just like, he's just like, I'm begging for one shot here.
Yeah.
And he does get it. And it's such a great triumphant moment because he plays Bob Seger's Night Moves.
Yeah, which is an amazing song.
It's an amazing song. It fits this moment so well because he's been fighting on the street this whole life and he's just talking about, making night moves and things like that. And it works so well. And to me, that's, they start turning on the recording equipment like, oh my, like this guy is great.
Yeah.
And then it shows him playing in front of a giant stadium show. So it's like, he made it. He finally, like, somebody in the family is finally a superstar now.
Yeah, they finally did it. And this might be a tangent, I don't know, but we watched the Siskel and Ebert review before this, and Siskel's whole thing was that he was Bob Seger in the end, and I'm like, did you watch the rest of the movie? They used other people's songs the whole time.
That I didn't. Yeah, I was like, Gene Siskel was like, yeah. So are they saying that this guy is Bob Seger? And I'm like, no, like
No.
what? What? And then I'm
Yeah.
glad because Roger Ebert called him out on it. He's like, no, it's clearly like Bob Seger is not like a thing in this world or what. It's like,
Yeah. It's all
but
fantasy almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that anyway. That's just it's such a great moment because it's so triumphant that it's like this probably took this family like 80 years before
Yeah.
somebody got really famous, and it's showing that the American dream is it doesn't happen overnight, but it is a real thing.
Yeah.
Like almost anybody can become famous.
Yeah. Yeah. Through hard work and perseverance. And yeah, and you get to see the end of the movie is pretty much like a concert movie almost. He plays like blue suede shoes and stuff like that. It's got like cool effects. This is probably when it's the least animated because you can really tell that it's real people playing into the camera and stuff.
Yeah, well,
it's just
that one's more or less like it's real footage, like put over a filter. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like you said, that's the right word, triumphant. It's just a triumphant end for a big movie. And like, this sounds huge. This movie's only 90 minutes. I don't know how they packed so much into this movie in 90 minutes. Like you said, I would have taken another hour, but even at 90
yeah,
minutes, I still think it covers all the bases very well.
yeah. Like I said, I would have maybe like tacked on like you could probably tack on like another 10 or 15 minutes to like each other part, and then maybe even like that second part maybe add like another 20 minutes even. So I
Yeah.
mean I could have easily have seen something like that, but it works very well. It's one of those that leaves you wanting more type of thing.
Mhm.
And like I said, this to me is like Ralph Bakshi's like magnum opus. Like this is like the one where it's like, oh yeah, this is you're firing on all cylinders here for me.
Mhm.
And then after this one though, I mean, he goes back to kind of like what he's done before with the movie Hey Good Looking, and which in my opinion is not very good.
That's one of his worst, actually, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that one. And to me it's kind of like I really wish you would have done something more like
Yeah.
more grounded in reality and something that looked a little better. And then he did, like I said, Fire and Ice, which is like a mystic, like a fantasy type of story. But again, that one's just a lot of very gratuitous, like butt shots and like just a lot of stuff that just did not work for me, and just very boring like characters and stuff. So
Yeah.
I really wish you would have done something else that was like American Pop like.
Yeah, I know. It's really sad because like you look at his career, and I mean he has good movies, but American Pop is the only one that I'd say that is like that in his filmography. Lord of the Rings is maybe the closest, but that's a fantasy film. It I don't know. It's definitely just the shining example of one great talent, like talent that Bakshi did, and he fired on all cylinders for this one. Um, American Pop is probably one of my favorite movies, favorite new discoveries that we've talked about, and I definitely think like as a listener, I think you should check it out. I think it's an awesome part of animation history. I don't think it gets enough due. Like I've been interested in this movie, but I hear nobody talking about it. It's worth going back to.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's almost anything you could want from a movie. Like to me, it almost surprises me that not that they've remade this one, but they haven't done something like this. Like I'm trying to think of like a movie where they do like a multi-generational type of movie where it's like it starts in one generation and it goes on like that. To me, it's like
Yeah.
a concept that probably should be done more, or something I would like to have seen more in other types of movies, like that
Yeah.
type of concept.
Like it happens, I feel like, but when it does, it's usually just two generations, right? And I think, like I said before, it's why animation lends itself so well to something like this, because hiring four generations of people and doing all that shooting and having them kind of look alike, it's tough, right? But yeah, I feel like there needs to be more, or there's not enough movies that center around the history of music over like a huge chunk of time of how like music has changed so much, like from like early like 1900s to the rock and roll of the 80s. I'd love to see more of that. This movie tries for so much, and usually when movies try for this much, it doesn't work, but somehow it works here.
Yeah, it does work a lot. I mean, like, and I think sometimes a lot of it can be like, I don't want to say pandering, but it's like, oh, well, we have to talk about these songs because they're popular or whatever.
Yeah.
But this one, I mean, Ralph Bakshi is like actually like a huge fan of like 60s and those types of like the hippie movement or whatever. He's put that in his movies a lot. So to me, it's like, okay, that one gets a pass because that's probably what he was listening to a lot at the time. So,
exactly.
But yeah, I fully recommend that you check this out. It's definitely one that you should see. I mean, there's, like I said before, it's not crude, it's not lewd or anything like that. Like his other movies that are very not for kids. This one, there's some drug use and violence in here, but it's definitely pretty tame compared to a lot of his other work. So
totally.
I give this probably one of my highest recommendations that we've done before.
Yeah, for sure. Check it out. Definitely.
But we do appreciate you joining us on this ride for a year.
No, thank you all for the support. Like when I started this, we don't have the biggest audience, of course, but when I started this, I had no expectations that we would have people even emailing us, constantly listening. The support that we've gotten from everybody has been awesome.
Yeah. If you've listened to us, if you're a regular listener or you're just checking us out for the first time, I mean, we definitely appreciate you just coming here and joining us. We're doing this because it's fun for us, and we want to make sure you guys are having a good time too. So whether you're a patron, not a patron, or you, like I said, you just listen every week, hey, we appreciate that.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate you.
But thank you. Nathan, what are we going to be talking about next time?
Well, I think it's pretty fitting that next time, right after our year anniversary, we're heading right into another week of James Bond and Godzilla. So I told you that James Bond would return in Thunderball. So we are going to be talking about Thunderball next week.
Oh, I thought we were going to be talking about a different movie.
Sorry. We're skipping ahead to Quantum of Solace. I felt like jumping around a little.
Well, perfect. We will. If you want to check out Thunderball, it is on Prime, I believe.
It's on Prime.
Yeah. It should be a fun time. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, and while Twitter is still a thing, you could follow us at DIDFpod. Please send us an email at driveindoublefeaturepodcast@gmail.com. Again, don't forget to check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/driveindoublefeature. But a very sincere until next time.
Until next time.
Pizza Man, we deliver.
Hey, Muko Man's here. What do you got for us?
Oh, man, do we need you?
Hey, if anybody has blow in this town, my man will.
You got the Coke, Daddy-O?
What do I look like, man? A soda fountain?
And what else you got there?
Songs.
You scoring songs now, too?
Giving them away. A song announced.
By who?
Me.
You can keep the songs, man.
I will keep the Coke, too.
Wait, don't go away. Wait a second. Come back here. Come back.
What is it, Pete? I have been running and fetching for you bunch of punks for 3 years now, and I don't want to be no candy man no more.
You want more money?
It's not the money, man.
Fine, we'll get someone else.
Do it.
No, hey, wait. Come on.
All right, Pete, what do you want?
I want you to play one of my songs.
Play? You mean record it?
Dig it.
No way, man.
Hey, look, man. We'll listen to one.
One?
Just one.
Okay. 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 Pass him out, Turkey.
Hey, don't hurt yourself.